How do you help a dying child with no cure? In a desperate experiment, a doctor and a chemist would create the first medical breakthrough in leukemia as they begin to crack the code on cancer. Welcome to another episode of The Casual Nerd, as we enter episode 4 of our History of Cancer series following the book The Emperor of All Maladies. Sidney Farber was born in 1903. He was known to be formal, precise, meticulous, and have a commanding presence. He became a pathologist at the Children's Hospital in Boston, working mainly with dead bodies in the basement of the hospital. He also wrote a book considered a classic in the field, The Post-Mortem Examination. Farber believed that to understand cancer as a whole, you need to start at the bottom of its complexity. When Farber decided to focus on cancer, the support for cancer was at a low, leukemia especially, due to the inoperable nature of a blood cancer. Farber was attracted to childhood leukemia mainly because it was easily quantifiable. Before CTs and MRI scans, it was hard to get an accurate read on the growth of a tumor, but an increase in white blood cells could easily be counted. Thus, Farber would be able to see if his experiments would make any measurable difference. Since leukemia was closely related to hematology, the study of blood, Farber decided to study how normal blood cells are created and then work from there to figure out how to block the growth of abnormal leukemic cells. If you remember in our previous video, we talked about anemia, and this is where that ties in. Based on Lucy Wells' findings of folic acid restoring normalcy to blood, Farber wondered if it would do the same in children with leukemia. He began trials of injecting children with leukemia with folic acid. Horrifically, it was found that folic acid actually accelerated the cancer, and the trial ended quickly. Farber gained valuable knowledge from his mistake and began to search for a substance that would do the opposite: cut off folic acid supply, thus in the opposite of anemia, starving the body of that nutrient instead of feeding it. This brings us to chemist Yellapragada Subbaro. His research mainly revolved around dissecting cells to figure out and synthesize the molecules that made them up. So far, he had been able to successfully pull the molecules ATP and creatine. Following the lead of a drug company called Eli Lilly, who isolated vitamin B12 and sold it to pernicious anemia sufferers, Yellapragada Subbaro decided to attempt to similarly isolate and extract folate. He actually wasn't able to extract it, so he would end up having to make it from scratch. Because of his success at this, he'd be able to create various forms of folic acid with only slight changes. How this worked on a molecular and cellular level was that his variants closely resembled the molecular structure of folic acid. Thus, it would trick the enzymes and receptors in the cells that are responsible for binding with folic acid to bind with these synthesized compounds instead. He could then create variants in these phospholate molecules so that after it is accepted, it could either mimic the folic acid or do nothing, thus blocking the receptors from taking up the real compound. Basically, he could create Farber's desired antifolate. Thus, Farber wrote to Subbaro and a new trial began. In 1947, Farber began trials using Subbaro's first antifolate, PAA, or pteroglutamic acid. Fun fact, the company this antifolate was coming from was called Ledrel, which after several acquisitions is now in modern day part of Pfizer. PAA wasn't working, so Subbaro and his team made some changes and came back with aminopterin. With a 3-year-old boy on the verge of death from the ineffectiveness of the first antifolate try, Farber quickly put him on the new aminopterin. The aminopterin made a huge difference. The white blood cell count in the boy, which had reached nearly 70,000, suddenly plateaued and then started dropping, putting many of the kids in the trial into remission, where they were seemingly getting healthier. However, the malignant cells weren't gone, and even if they were, they would return resistant to the aminopterin and other antifolates after a few months. But it bought their patients some time back, even up to 6 months. Although not a cure, this was a huge win. Thank you for joining us here on The Casual Nerd. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying the series and want more in-depth information, I would highly recommend picking up a copy of The Emperor of All Maladies. It goes into way more detail than I can include here in these videos. Until next time.